Hello! You're watching movie snapshot scenes, and this is the summary of Million Dollar Baby. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Frankie Dunn had spent his entire life inside the ropes of a boxing ring. A grizzled veteran trainer with a battered soul, he owned a modest gym in Los Angeles, where the sound of punching bags and the grit of sweat clung to the air. He was a man of few words and many regrets, haunted by a fractured relationship with his estranged daughter and distant from the world outside his gym. Frankie didn't just train boxers, he protected them, both from the brutality of the sport and from making choices that could shatter their futures. Eddie, Scrap Iron Dupree, a one-eyed ex-fighter and Frankie's oldest friend, kept the gym running. A quiet observer and steady presence, Scrap watched over the fighters like a guardian spirit. His narration would become the soul of this story, witnessing a transformation that neither he nor Frankie ever expected. Enter Maggie Fitzgerald, 31, years old, dirt poor, and driven by a fire that poverty and age had failed to extinguish. She walked into Frankie's gym with nothing but raw determination and a battered dream to become a professional boxer. She was relentless, staying long after everyone else had left, training with a hunger born of desperation. Maggie believed boxing was her one chance to matter, but to Frankie, she was a hopeless case. Too old, no experience, and worst of all, she was a girl. But Maggie didn't quit. She kept showing up, day after day, punch after punch, until her sheer will became impossible to ignore. Scrap saw something in her, a glimmer of the old fire that once lived in every fighter's eyes. He nudged Frankie, encouraging him to take a second look. Frankie finally agreed to give her some advice, but made it clear he would not train her. Maggie absorbed every word, every correction, with the eagerness of someone who had waited her whole life to be told what she was capable of. And then something shifted. Frankie, the man who kept his heart behind walls thicker than concrete, saw a spark in Maggie that stirred something long buried. In her stubbornness, he saw courage. In her loneliness, he saw himself. And in her dream, he saw a chance for redemption. The trainer and the dreamer had met, and neither would ever be the same. At first, Frankie kept Maggie at arm's length. He offered advice grudgingly, correcting her stance, her footwork, the way she held her gloves. But Maggie soaked it all in like a sponge, eager, respectful, and hungry to learn. She didn't just want to be a boxer, she needed it. Frankie saw the bruises on her arms, the poverty in her clothes, and the hollow silence behind her smile. But more than anything, he saw that she never made excuses. She worked harder than any fighter he'd ever seen. Bit by bit, the walls began to crack. Late one night, after all the other fighters had gone home, Frankie quietly stepped into the ring with Maggie. With a reluctant sigh, he agreed to train her. On one condition, she must never ask questions, especially not about his past. Maggie nodded, and the training began in earnest. What followed was a transformation. Maggie's awkward movements turned, sharp and precise. Her fists, once wild and uncoordinated, became disciplined weapons. Frankie taught her not just how to fight, but how to control her power, how to read her opponent, how to wait for the right moment before striking. She absorbed his lessons with gratitude and awe, and he, without realizing it, began to care. At night, Frankie would visit his local church, always sitting in the same pew, pestering the priest with difficult questions about guilt, forgiveness, and lost daughters. But no prayer could erase his regrets. Training Maggie became a form of penance, one he never spoke aloud. Meanwhile, Scrap watched the two with a knowing gaze. He'd seen what Frankie hadn't admitted yet, the bond forming. Between them was more than trainer and fighter. It was a father and a daughter, healing each other through discipline, pain, and shared silence. Soon, Frankie started booking Maggie's amateur fights. She entered the ring with nerves, but walked out victorious, her arms raised, her spirit alight. Punch after punch, she climbed the ranks, silencing every doubter along the way. She knocked out opponents with a speed and ferocity that startled even seasoned veterans. The girl no one believed in was rising fast. But with every win, a new question loomed over them both. How far could they really go, and was Frankie willing to take her there? With every victory, Maggie's name began to echo louder in boxing circles. Once dismissed as a nobody, she was now the fighter to watch. No longer just a hopeful amateur, She was a force, quick, disciplined, and relentless. Her knockouts came, fast and clean, often before the audience had settled in. What she lacked in experience, she made up for in willpower and precision. The girl from Missouri was rising, one punch at a time. Frankie remained cautious. He knew how cruel boxing could be. One moment you're on top, the next you're broken. But even he couldn't deny it anymore. Maggie was something special. There was a fury inside her that had been shaped by hunger and hardship. She didn't fight to impress. She fought like her soul depended on it. Backstage after the fights, their bond deepened. Frankie began calling her Mo Quishel, a phrase in Gaelic he refused to translate. Maggie cherished the name, sensing it meant something tender and important. It became a thread between them, a quiet reminder that, for once in her life, someone truly believed in her. Scrap watched with a bittersweet pride. He knew what it meant for Frankie to open his heart again. He also knew the danger in caring too much, because boxing didn't just break bodies, it broke people. Then came the offer, a shot at the world title, a real title, in Las Vegas. The opponent? Billy the Blue Bear, a savage, experienced champion with a reputation for fighting dirty. She was mean, bigger, and brutal, the kind of fighter who didn't just win, but punished. Frankie hesitated. He'd spent his life protecting his fighters from the kind of path that now lay before Maggie. But she didn't hesitate, not for a second. This wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about finally being seen, about proving she belonged, that she mattered. "I got nobody but you, Frankie," she told him. "Don't let me go it alone." He looked at her then, not as a fighter, but as a daughter, and he made his choice. They were going to Vegas. Las Vegas pulsed with light, noise, and promise. Underneath the spectacle, in the calm shadows of a hotel gym, Maggie prepared for the biggest fight of her life. Frankie was there, silent as ever, wrapping her hands with the same care one would offer a fragile artifact. This was more than a match. It was a culmination of pain, of perseverance, of everything they had built together. The arena was electric. Cameras flashed. Fans screamed. But in the corner of the ring, there was only Maggie, Frankie, and a storm waiting to erupt. Billy the Blue Bear entered the ring like a force of nature, taller, heavier, and known for her viciousness. She didn't just fight, she punished. But Maggie, calm and focused, didn't flinch. She had trained for this. She had earned this. From the opening bell, Maggie stunned everyone. She moved with grace and precision, landing clean punches, dodging with finesse. Round after round, she outboxed the champion. Even Frankie, cautious by nature, started to believe Maggie was about to become world champion. And then it happened. After the bell at the end of a round, a moment when both fighters should have retreated, Billy threw a brutal, illegal sucker punch. Maggie, caught off guard, fell backward and crashed onto the wooden stool that hadn't yet been removed. The sound of her neck snapping echoed louder than any cheer. The world seemed to stop. Frankie rushed in. Doctors stormed the ring. Maggie lay motionless, her eyes wide with fear, her body unresponsive. In an instant, the dream had turned to nightmare. The diagnosis was devastating. A complete spinal cord injury at the neck. Quadriplegic, permanently. Maggie would never walk again, never fight again, never even breathe without assistance. Frankie stayed by her side, every day, silent, broken. Maggie, once full of fire and defiance, now lay in a hospital bed, trapped in a body that had betrayed her. The world that once roared her name now faded into sterile walls and beeping machines. And yet, even in that bed, she remained Maggie Fitzgerald, proud, tough, unyielding. But the girl who had fought to matter was beginning to ask herself, without boxing, without movement, without hope, was she still herself? And if not, what was left? The hospital room became Maggie's new ring. Tubes, machines, and nurses replaced the ropes, gloves, and adrenaline. Frankie visited every day, never missing a morning, reading to her, adjusting her pillow, bringing small comforts that masked the unbearable truth neither of them could change. But Maggie knew her body was no longer hers. Her independence, her power, her future. It had all been stolen in a single, illegal blow. Worse than the paralysis was the slow erosion of dignity. She couldn't feed herself, couldn't breathe without the hiss of a ventilator. couldn't even swat away a fly. And still, Maggie fought. But this time, not for glory or belts. She fought for the right to choose how her story would end. Her family came, finally, not to comfort her, but to claim whatever money Frankie had helped her earn. Their visit left her colder than the injury ever could. They hadn't come to see Maggie Fitzgerald, the fighter. They came for scraps. Only Frankie remained true, but even he couldn't stop what was coming. One day, Maggie asked him, quietly, resolutely, to let her go, to help her die. She had lost more than muscle and movement. She had lost herself, and she was ready. Frankie refused. At first, he pleaded, bargained, changed the subject. He tried everything to reignite the flame in her eyes, to keep her tethered to the world by hope or guilt or habit. But Maggie, with calm eyes and a tired voice, told him a story. When she was little, her daddy called her Mo Quishel. She never knew what it meant. She just knew it made her feel loved. Frankie sat in silence, shattered by the weight of her request, and by the unbearable realization that he was the only one who could give her peace. He went to the priest, desperate for absolution or instruction, but all he found was a wall of moral certainty that couldn't see the love or the mercy behind Maggie's plea. In the end, Frankie made a choice. One final night, he entered her hospital room with quiet purpose. He leaned close, whispered something, only she could hear, and then disconnected the machines. Before he left, he kissed her gently and finally revealed what Mo Quishel meant. My darling, my blood. And then he disappeared. After that final night, Frankie Dunn was never seen again. He left no note, no farewell, no sign of where he had gone. The man who had once controlled every detail inside the ring vanished from the world as quietly as he had lived in it. The gym stood still without him. Fighters came and went, asking questions that Scrap never answered. The heavy bag still swung in the corner, untouched, like a relic of someone who had poured his soul into one final act of love. Scrap remained behind, holding the story close. In his quiet narration, we learn what truly remained, not the tragedy of Maggie's death, but the brilliance of the life she chose to live on her terms. A poor waitress from Missouri who dared to step into a ring where she didn't belong, who fought for every inch of her dignity, who found in an old, broken trainer the father she never had, and in return gave him something he thought he longer deserved: redemption. Frankie had trained champions, but Maggie was different. She wasn't a fighter because she won. She was a fighter because she never stopped trying, even when the world said she should. She proved that legacy isn't measured in belts or trophies, but in the people we change. Scrap, now alone, wrote her story down on the back of a letter, the same one Frankie had sent his estranged daughter year after year, letters that always came back unopened. But this story, was different. It wasn't for forgiveness. It was for memory. We never learn what happened to Frankie. Some say he vanished to a cabin in the woods, the kind of place where he could live with the ghosts he carried and the choice he made. Others believe he died along with Maggie, not physically, but in spirit, because everything he had left was buried with her. But what remains is clear. Maggie Fitzgerald became more than a fighter. She became a symbol of perseverance, of quiet strength, of love found in the unlikeliest of places. And somewhere, in the stillness of morning, in a small diner tucked away from the noise of the world, maybe Frankie sits at a table in the corner. Maybe he whispers a name, Mo Quishel.